Well, kia koto, ko Alvaro toko inoa. Alvaro Orsi, I'm the data science and AI lead at ESR, soon to be known as the New Zealand Institute for Public Health and Forensic Science, following the reforms from the science sector that you are probably well aware. So today we're going to run a panel to discuss the OECD AI principles, particularly from the perspective of AI researchers. So I wanted to start with a very brief introduction to, in case you're not familiar with this topic, the OECD AI principles. These are a set of 5 principles that were agreed back in 2019 by a number of countries from OECD, and then it expanded. I think today we have over 47 or so countries in the world. So it's the first country or intergovernment agreement, essentially to set the basic principles for AI development and AI adoption. And there are essentially 5 very well, I would say very common sense, intuitive, and reasonable high-level principles. First, inclusive growth, sustainable development and well-being. Second, human rights and democratic values, including fairness and privacy. Then transparency and explainability, robustness, security and safety, and accountability. You've probably come across these terms in the public discussion over the past couple of years, in particular with the with the rise and the incredible popularity of generative AI tools. So everybody seems to be talking about this nowadays. The OECD also put together some recommendations for policymakers, which have to do with investing in AI research, fostering an inclusive AI enabling ecosystem, shaping and enabling interoperable governance and policy environment for AI, building human capacity and preparing for labor market transition, and international cooperation for trustworthy AI. So all this set of principles and recommendations, like I was saying, they have served as the basis for further policies that have been implemented, throughout the world, and these are just some examples that I'm not going to go into detail. Most relevant for us in New Zealand, the OECD AI principles, they were adopted in 2019. There is an update also in 2024 to account for the very different ecosystem now, with generative AI tools being everywhere, essentially. And then there have been some other similar agreements and frameworks adopted, like the Bletchley Declaration, the Seoul Ministerial Statement, and also national frameworks and principles like the Public Service AI Framework, which was developed actually and released recently with a set of guidelines, for example, for the use of generative AI across the public sector. The Algorithm Charter for Aotearoa, New Zealand, it's been in place for a number of years now to ensure transparency and fair and ethical use of algorithms. And the Maori data sovereignty principles, as you probably know as well. So in this conversation, we wanted to not to discuss the OECD principles by themselves, but actually bring the perspective of researchers, which is probably a very unique way of addressing this topic. Nowadays, perhaps 10 years ago or 15 years ago, AI researchers would have been pretty much the only voice that you would have heard in a discussion like this. But today, the AI ecosystem is full of new players, because AI is a research discipline, but it's also a product. It's a technology, it's a piece of tool. There are multiple definitions for AI, meaning that people involved and the people that are actually have a relevance in this space can come from many different perspectives. So we want to address this from the perspective of research in New Zealand. What does it mean? What are the new opportunities? How do we align ourselves, and so on? And so I'm going to let our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with James William from the University of Canterbury.
I can unmute, but I don't think I can share video.
We can hear you. Yes. Yeah.
Is that working?
There we go.
Yep. Hi, So my name is James Williams. I work with the University of Canterbury, teaching in the Masters of Applied Data Science program, and I also coordinate their data science industry projects, so all of the master's students and their placements within industry. This is alongside my primary work running Moderator, which initially I started out as a data science consulting company when data science was becoming the marketable buzzword, but I'm moving steadily into what I would describe as data-driven and now increasingly AI-enabled software as a service. A lot of my initial work was for e-commerce companies in the US, but now most of my work is focused within New Zealand, finding ways to automate systems, reduce costs in infrastructure, asset maintenance, statutory inspection, and manufacturing industries. So really boots on the ground, kind of trying to transform the ways in which some of those businesses operate. And it's very rewarding, and I'm glad to be able to be part of this forum today to talk about how our perspectives on AI and its use in education and in industry.
Thank you very much, James. Gill.
Kia ora koutou, ko Gill Dobbie toko anoa. I'm a professor at Waimata Taumata Rao, so the University of Auckland. Have a number of hats that I wear. At the moment, my hair's a bit wet, so I needed a hat earlier on. I am co-director of a couple of groups at the University of Auckland. So I'm co-director of the Centre of Machine Learning for Social Good, and also co-director of NAUI alongside Michael Whitbrock. And my day today has been here in Wellington with the Marsden Fund Council. So I'm chair of the Marsden Fund Council. My research focuses on AI. So I kind of think that I've been doing AI for 40 years because some of what I did in my PhD also focused on fundamentals of AI. So in general, I work on the fundamental side, but I do like to ensure that my work is grounded both in application and effects on society. So I'm very interested in the ethical side of AI, and also I do work in applying AI in healthcare. I'm also looking forward to the discussion today. I think hopefully it'll be lively, and we'll have lots of good arguments.
Gill. Mong.
Oh, hello, and I just realized I can be shown in the picture, right? Hello, and I'm Mong. Actually, the full name is Mengjie Zhang at Victoria University of Wellington. I have only been here for 25 years, not that long. Gill just mentioned actually. Actually, when I came to Vic, Gill was here, and then Gill moved to Auckland. So we have been doing collaboration together. So my current role is the director for the Center for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at Victoria University of Wellington, and launched exactly 2 years ago by the MB Minister and the IEEE Computational Intelligence Society President. And so my main area is actually AI, machine learning, and big data. And at Gill, I have been doing mainly on the fundamental research, but in the recent few years, have been and using and developing AI techniques and for key applications in New Zealand. Those areas are mainly primary industry like agriculture, horticulture, and forest stuff, and also the climate change, and collaborate with actually Intactics Research Center and GNS, and also and health and medical and medical systems, and also working in high-tech renewable energy and cybersecurity and high-value manufacturing. And we also actually here have the teaching programs of postgraduate AI and undergraduate AI programs, and we also have a number of directions, mainly in the deep learning, transfer learning, and evolutionary learning and optimization, and shadowing and combinatorial optimization, and also is explainable, interpretable AI and machine learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mong. And last but not least, Markus.
Yeah, kia ora koutou, ko Markus Luczak-Roesch toka ingoa. Thanks for having me on the panel. I am currently a professor of informatics here at Te Herenga Waka at Victoria University of Wellington, where I also hold the chair in complexity science since 2024. I came to Aotearoa in 2016 after doing a postdoc in computer science at the University of Southampton on a large program grant on the future of the World Wide Web with Sir Nigel Shadbolt and Sir Tim Berners-Lee, largely looking at how do we understand the socio-technical system that the World Wide Web had become at that time, where people and technology get together and sometimes do an unanticipated stuff. With my research group here, we're doing mostly methods research to understand large data streams and then apply new methods to paleoclimate data and other forms of data. And a large substantial part of my life at the moment is also being one of 2 co-directors of Te Pūnaha Matatini, which is one of 10 centers of research excellence with a focus on complex systems, as you may have heard, possibly during the COVID times when Te Pūnaha Matatini was heavily involved in the epidemiological modeling. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Markus. So I want to kick off this panel discussion. We'll have about two minutes for each panelist to discuss. We're going to start with a general question for all of them, and we're going to go into more specific topics. And by the end, if we have time, we would love to open also the discussion to the audience if they want to interact with our panelists. Okay, so I'm going to start with a general question for all of you in the context of research agency and commercial AI ecosystems. So the OECD principles identify trustworthy AI as something that should be leveraged from AI as a mature research discipline, as opposed to just a novel technology product. Now, given the dominance of large commercial organizations in AI development and deployment, the question is, how can AI researchers in New Zealand maintain meaningful influence throughout the innovation lifecycle, from conception to deployment, particularly when research insights must compete with commercial imperatives and market pressures? So I'm going to let Gill start with this.
Okay, so it was a long question, and so I've reinterpreted it to what can AI researchers bring to trustworthy trustworthy AI. And I'm going to be the old person on the panel and talk about trustworthy computing. So, you know, very early on, people didn't trust computers. They weren't sure whether, you know, programs were going to give you the right results and in what domains those programs would work. So I think we've been in this position before, where we're looking at, you know, what do we mean by trustworthy and how do we deal with that? I think we can learn lessons from general computer science and trustworthiness in computer science. So there was a whole new field that grew out of that around software engineering. So, you know, how do we engineer trustworthy computing? And so one question I would ask is, do we need some sort of AI engineering, which is based around this topic as well? And in that, I think what we're wanting to find is, you know, can we have guarantees of when our AI is going to give us the correct answer? You know, are there conditions under which our AI system is going to work and not work?
Wow.
So some of the areas that I've worked in are related to this. So one project that my team has been working on is around applicability domains. So applicability domains are something that have come from chem informatics. And in chem informatics, it's sort of saying which chemicals will react with other chemicals in a, you know, safe way and give you good results. And so what we've looked at is how we can extend that to artificial intelligence as an applicability domain. You know, model is going to work properly within this space. So that's work that I did with York Wicker. Another project that I've worked on is around detecting and mitigating bias in large language models. And this is work with Vithya Yogarajan and Tataka Keegan. So this is looking particularly at the New Zealand context. So there has been work done internationally around detecting and mitigating bias, but there's been very little done in New Zealand. And, you know, we do have special conditions here. So, and the last piece of work I'd like to mention has been around detecting adversarial attacks. So this is ensuring that your models have been trained on good data and they're not being attacked by outside bodies. And again, that's work with your Wicker. So what I'm trying to point out here is that as researchers, we can look into very practical means to ensure that the AI that is being developed is trustworthy. To make the most of this research in New Zealand, we need to build strong partnerships across universities, PROs, government, iwi, and industry, so that all the findings are shared. Otherwise, we're just, you know, working in our little silos again. And researchers may not have the scale of big tech, but we can have influence by defining what responsible innovation looks like in the local context. And we do need to do this in New Zealand for New Zealand.
Thank you very much for those words, Gill. Very thoughtful. Markus.
Thanks, Gill. Very, very thoughtful trigger. It's really interesting to see how everyone interprets those questions, which was a very long question. So, but I want to pick up on we can learn from lessons, is what Gill said, and my starting point would have been very similar. We can learn from lessons in the past how not to handle emerging technologies that come at us, which is happened to us with social media, because what happened with social media is that we have completely outsourced the innovation life cycle to private corporations, and for some time data access was guaranteed, and we know all the story around Twitter to X and so on and so forth, and we know European efforts now to regain access for researchers to actually look into those systems and to study profoundly how do the algorithms that they use impact, for example, social phenomena, human behavior, and so on and so forth. And what needs to happen for that is that we start going into the journey of AI research and development as a country by considering it as civic infrastructure, and not considering it as a technology and then finding out that it is actually part of our civic infrastructure that kind of holds our democratic fabric quite substantially, and sometimes directly and sometimes indirectly has even governance influence, because it can prevent things and enable things from happening. So my point would be that pick up on what Gill said around partnerships, and I think a strong governance position is required to actually say we want to, from the outset, consider AI as civic infrastructure and enable our public researchers, so researchers in PROs and universities, who are, by the definitions of their jobs, acting in the interest of the public good, that they can exercise exactly all of those functions that Gill just mentioned, but not as an afterthought when platforms hit us, or when we are lucky that someone gives us access to data or the platform, but actually that this is also supported by regulation.
Thank you very much, Markus. Mong?
Thank you, Avro, and Gill and Markus already provide a very good actual point from different angles, and I'm going to probably another different angle actually to interpret this question actually. And you know, and it mentions the commercial organizations actually, very large ones, Google, Amazon, and IBM, Microsoft, Oracle. You know, that's a very good connected to us, to our everyday life, and they tend to dominate the AI research, particularly in the generative AI, big neural networks actually, big data set, huge data set, and images and natural languages, that's a lot. And basically, and some people have to compete with them. But as a country, New Zealand, we have our own characteristics, and we are not as big, as many other countries. We only have 5 million people, but we can do actually several things that continue to impact the world, actually, in both fundamental research and applications of AI. In fundamental research, probably we can't do everything what we ever we like, and we several things and that's already and play international leadership roles and need to continue and in several areas like stream data mining and evolutionary learning optimization, many other areas we are recognized good that we need to go. On the other hand, in the application side, actually, we have a lot of things unique. Our climate and our agricultural products, if you look at actually the world exportation for the fish and different kinds of fish, shellfish and finfish, and they all recognize, green shell mussels. Previously, we think that's, our unique, and now we were told actually some parts of Chile and China also have the green shell mussels, and they well recognize in New Zealand that's the best. If we can develop an AI system actually that help grow and the quality and also help and produce actually interpretable solutions so that the industry can trust actually, that'd be great. We can do that actually. And the king salmon, that's also very good. And also there are something actually areas we are also unique actually. Gill mentions the Vision Makaranga, the Maori side, Maori language, Titaka has been doing a lot. That's all, different areas. We are unique. And, some medical systems, some, things actually, New Zealand unique, and we can use the prior knowledge actually to build actual AI systems that can be actually trustable. And, people can consider, oh, that's, and people understand what that is. You can modify. That's, I was in the 1980s and doing some symbolic AI stuff. At that time, symbolic AI system and expert system, they did have an interpretable component there. And now we are mostly doing computation, rely on those things. But we can borrow some ideas and just combine with our New Zealand unique things that we can and continue to impact the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mom. And James.
It's quite hard being the last person to answer such a well-phrased but deep question. All I think I really want to add and emphasize is the importance of partnerships. One of the benefits of being involved at the University of Canterbury, both in the context of the education teaching space and in the industry partnership space around even data science projects, many of which now are starting to leverage AI tools more and more, and there's innovation happening across a number of different industries, is that we can see the benefit to those partnerships, not just in terms of the innovation lifecycle, but also in terms of the next generation of theoretical and applied researchers. So we're seeing those partnerships happen at the research level, but also even through student placements within industry. They're equipped through their knowledge of how these tools are rapidly developing. They're equipped to actually make meaningful progress, even within the context of a summer project in some of these spaces, often because the application is domain specific, New Zealand industry specific. And there's real progress that can be made in those spaces, even alongside the incredible rate of global progression from the giants like OpenAI and Meta and Google and all of the other industries that have commercial industries that have incredible amounts of money to throw at this problem mostly for the benefit of commercialization. So I think that partnership, especially in New Zealand, at the scale at which we're operating as a country, we've got a non-trivial number of the universities represented in this forum right now, on this panel right now, and being a reasonably small country, we can be very well tied into progression, innovation, both within industry and within the academic environment. So I would just really encourage that partnership and the education of the next generation of researchers.
Yep. Thank you very much, James. That was actually really interesting, and hopefully this is a good point to pivot into a perhaps more specific question, which is to address the hottest topic right now, which is generative AI and thinking about the research priorities for it. As I mentioned before, the OECD published an updated version in 2024 of the principles to essentially to address generative AI, right? Explicit, particularly all the challenges that are posed by the systems that include misinformation, as you know, disinformation, information integrity, safety concerns, and environmental sustainability as well. So the question, and I'm gonna come back to you, James, what specific research priorities and collaborative approaches should New Zealand AI researchers adopt to lead in developing generative AI systems that genuinely embody transparency, accountability, fairness, robustness, and inclusive growth?
This is a tricky one, I think, because there are so many different aspects to this question. I'll try and focus on a couple that I thought of while preparing for this. One which I'm increasingly concerned about is not so much just the generative AI models themselves spreading misinformation or disinformation, but even just the misuse of those tools by people in their various industries who are confidently wrong because they've been given that confidence through a quick skim read from the output of a generative AI model that has all of the bells and whistles except for the primary sources, except for the actual due diligence that they need to do to then go and make decisions that are important within that industry. I've seen a number of people in the statutory inspection space send emails with absolute confident, incorrect statements. And it's really hard sometimes to pull those back, and the impacts can be quite severe. So bringing it back to the research priorities and collaboration, I think it's really important that as we start to use these tools more and more, there is research into how to expose the information sources used to train those models and how to make that industry specific, because there's often niche standards that would be relevant only within the New Zealand context, but the answer that we're getting from a generative model might be predominantly leaning towards standards that apply in the US context. And I don't think that there's not necessarily the capability of the models themselves, but there's not enough awareness around the need for continuing to go to those primary sources. So I would really like to see frameworks around either governance around how these tools are used, or at least frameworks around how outputs from these models are fact-checked, so that there is, if not trust in the direct output themselves, there are clear steps to be able to then peer review, validate the output before actions are made from it. And there's already well-established peer review processes in a wide range of industries. When decisions are being made, proposals are being made, there's already a clear peer review process that's specific to that industry. And so I think there's a benefit to developing frameworks around that, because at the moment, practically speaking, I'm seeing everybody, even if they've got corporate networks, they're just pulling up ChatGPT on their phone, typing it out in an email and sending it anyway. So it's happening, and there is not enough policy awareness or enforcement of frameworks around this in general.
Thank you, James. I totally agree with you, by the way. That's an awesome response. Meng.
Yeah. Thank you, and James, poses very good ideas there. Post things actually. I add a little bit more actually, and this is talking about the priorities for generative AI. That's and we know that generative AI is often with very large models actually, and or large language models or other models, and the data set they put more and more bigger and bigger, and in those areas I would like to stress 2 points. One point is that the AI research is not only on the large language models things actually. There are many other areas New Zealand people should continue to do actually. So, but come back to this actually, because this is focused on generative AI. But in my opinion, and generative AI, not every area, and people should apply generative AI. And many of, for example, the very big and data sets like image data or natural language data, probably the big OpenAI, Google, Amazon, those big companies are focusing on. In my opinion, New Zealand people probably should not focus on that and compete with them. We don't have the resources. GPUs, they have thousands of GPU cards. If you look at the whole New Zealand, how many we have, right? So particularly in the universities and Crown Research Institute, we don't have those resources. On the other hand, again, New Zealand have many unique stuff, like the health system, digital twin. Alvaro, you have been doing that, the Maori language, several other things, the climate change. Some New Zealand have unique things, and so we can actually, using the generative model or develop generative models, actually focusing on the unique areas. And when doing that, actually, we don't have to start from scratch. In many cases, probably use the predefined or pre-trained some model. We fine tuning based on some area that can save our resources. Another point is that, New Zealand, we have many very smart and PhD students, postdocs, and master thesis students. So we do not compete the resources with the companies, but we focus on the new ideas, the smart, those ideas, try to, put relatively small models so that it can be more robotic, low actually interpretable. There are quite some methods and can actually integrate some of the existing AI machine learning techniques with the large generative models actually, and then so that some pieces can be more interpretable and people can actually focus on some area, and so still not only leading actually the world, but in those areas, but also actually generate an impact to New Zealand economy and all actually environment or health outcome. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Mong. And I'll continue with you now. Let's try to keep our answers short, so we can make sure that we give everyone a chance. So you, Mong, particularly you are an expert in computer vision, as well as many other things. I mean, computer vision systems are an example of a technology that is increasingly deployed in public spaces and critical infrastructure. And on the other hand, some people say that 2025 is the year of AI agents, right? That will quickly become deployed at scale across businesses and industry, etc., to automate tasks and rely less on human input for critical decision making. So I guess the question to you, how can we balance the OECD principles, particularly around transparency, explainability, given the inherent complexity of these models?
Thanks, Alvaro. Actually, yes, I have been doing computer vision image processing for many years, and and on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, I was labeled a symbolic AI person, and in the 1980s, 1990s actually, and did a lot on knowledge engineering, knowledge-based system, and expert systems, and if we look at the very fundamental AI, at the beginning in the 1955-56. When John McCarthy and Mark Minsky, those people, 5 people proposed in Dartmouth, right? They want to build actually a generic system and based on logic and or symbolic things, actually the whole thing that can solve everything. And clearly, so far they haven't achieved as much as they predicted. On the other hand, the computational side, this is the generative model. In my opinion, this is a combination of the original symbolic side and the computational side. Alvaro, you mentioned the agent system. That's another very good example. And many of the previous people who are doing symbolic AI knowledge-based system, have been doing agent and multi-agent systems, and that's a lot. And in my opinion, in the computer vision and agent, there are a lot of techniques they can combine together to solve problems. Even in images, in the large companies, they did a lot of very huge data set. And, or even actually for us in New Zealand, we try to solve real world problems like in the agriculture industry, in the forest and trees industry, and climate change industry. There's a lot of things actually we can use, actually the traditional computer vision and image processing techniques. We can also combine with the modern generative AI and machine learning techniques, and also some of the knowledge base, including some of the agents, the the systems actually to solve them together. Again, we don't need, in many cases, a huge models, but we can actually doing that actually relatively small models that can be people can trust actually, and also probably running that much faster. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mohan. That was interesting. Gill?
So my view is that transparency is really, really important, but it needs to be fit for purpose. So it's not one size fits all. You know, we have to work out who the user of the feedback is going to be. So when I think about autonomous vehicles, you may want some sense of explainability or interpretability for mechanics. They might want to know, you know, what's going wrong. They might want to debug the car and fix it up. You may need some sense of explainability for law. So if something goes wrong and a law is broken, then they would need some explanation of that. And generally, people may want to understand how their car is working. They might want to work out how to use it more optimally. So I think when we look at transparency, we need to look at why we want transparency, what is that transparency going to be used for, and what is the best way to display the information about the system. You know, a lot of the research these days is we're going to have these pretty diagrams, and they do look pretty, but it often hides the detail. So we need to think really carefully about transparency.
Absolutely agree with you on that one. I'll continue with you now. I'll bring the discussion to perhaps a topic that is, I know that is that you care a lot, and I mean, we both actually care a lot about, which is AI in health, okay? The OECD emphasizes human-centered values and fairness, right? So drawing from your health AI research and experience, what do you think are the most pressing challenges facing AI deployment in New Zealand's healthcare system? And how can research and researchers address this?
This is a great question. First of all, I'd like to come back to James's comment around regulation. I think one of the major concerns is lack of decisions about regulation, and that is slowing adoption of AI systems in New Zealand. So it's a little bit like the Wild West out there, and someone, I think it might have been Markus that mentioned that before, you know, people just use ChatGPT, you know, in any old time, any old way. So I think there needs to be some regulation, but it should be light regulation and it should be risk-based regulation. So we don't need to have a hammer, you know, on every piece of AI that's being deployed.
Yeah.
This morning, when I was getting on a plane, I was looking at the Herald and I was reading about a new initiative that's being rolled out in general practice, and that's the automatic consults. So that's going to take workload off GPs. I think what was interesting there was that the article's very scant on detail, but for when things like that are deployed in the test in the community, we need to know how they've been tested. So, you know, if I'm going to have some sort of automatic consultation, I want to know where the information's coming from and, you know, how accurate it's going to be and things like that. Otherwise, I can just use Google. So, you know, I think that some of the key challenges for healthcare are around regulation. I think there's just a whole lot of opportunities, but we need to deploy systems in a systematic kind of way.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that, Jill. Markus, what are your thoughts?
I'd probably like to make 2 or 3 points. So the first one is I'd like to lay out the challenge to AI researchers to ask the question whether we want to build AI for the current or a future health system. So because if there's one thing that we know, then that our health system is in a process of transition. It's probably a very slow one, and we're probably not experiencing it in a day-to-day basis, but we do know that we're still operating in a health system that's basically tailored towards acute care. But we know that our health challenges have changed, which means if we're listening very carefully to the public health experts, then there will be a transition. And I think there are really, really interesting, probably also more fundamental AI questions that can be asked about a future system and visions of future systems, where I think New Zealand researchers can make really, really profound fundamental contributions with small models. Because I think the more contemporary challenges that we might see in practices where we have assisted note-taking and so on will probably be addressed with systems we already got. So maybe we might want to put our attention to that. And then the second point I'd like to make is I think there are big wins with small data possible, and it's not necessarily the moonshot AI ideas that are going to be or most influential in the health sector, but there are actually really, really great opportunities of small solutions that change little processes, but they have cascade effects that can be really, really profound. And it might well be that in what we would call small data and boring AI, compared to the really, really fancy stuff, where huge impact in the health system can actually be had. And then the third point is, I think it is part of fairness for AI researchers to also, whenever we care about the algorithmic solutions, to also model impact on workforces, because and that goes back to the point of the small wins, right? Because if we are actually solving a small problem of efficiency or freeing some time, we may actually want to think straight away about how can that be redeployed to actually address a problem that is particularly important from a New Zealand health system perspective, because of our socio-cultural and demographic distribution, of our geography, and so on and so forth. Because we want to be fair on the workforce, to actually not just say we're replacing one of your tasks, but also we're enabling you to do the thing that we really need to get better at.
Thanks a lot, Markus. That was very, very interesting. Now, I want to ask the panelists that if we can, go over the next set of questions perhaps a bit quicker, so we have time to also answer some of the questions that are being in the chat, which I think will be really interesting. So continue with you, Markus. You with Te Puna Matahini. So it's a question about cultural complexity. So Te Puna Matahini is a center of research excellence that bridges multiple knowledge systems. How can complex systems research and data science programs at university help integrate indigenous knowledge frameworks with OECD AI principles to create uniquely New Zealand approaches to AI governance and sovereignty?
Even though we want to be quick, but allow me to start with the acknowledgement that I obviously have no authority to speak for and on behalf of Indigenous people. I'm a New Zealander, but I have the privilege of being one of the co-directors of Te Puna Matahini. And what I will say is what we try to do to create and hold space for Indigenous scholars to actually undertake and have agency around the research in the complex system space. So that's the approach that Te Puna Matahini takes, which means for us that we are having conversations in spaces that might be much more unfamiliar to most AI researchers, because we leave the university and we wananga on a marae to actually open up the space for the Indigenous communities to own the conversation and have them in the appropriate platforms. What I think is incredibly required is what I would call epistemic humility. And I think that goes back to how we educate. So if I put it in a nutshell, what I'm seeing is we move from p-values to effect sizes to whatever measure of uncertainty and approach we take with AI. And maybe at some point we also move into quantum frameworks of generating what truth means. And in the scientific sense, we are all kind of moving along that line. But I think there's also an epistemic humility required to think about what does it mean to create knowledge and create truth. And I think that naturally then opens space for Indigenous perspectives where there are natural, much longer going conversations about hidden causes, complex timescales, and so on and so forth. And I think within Te Puna Hamatatini, we try to enable that by creating and holding space for our Indigenous scholars to then have agency of leading those conversations. And I think in AI research, that's very similar, which means it cannot just happen within the institution of the universities.
Thanks, Markus. That was really interesting. James, keen to hear your thoughts from data science training programs.
I don't have a huge amount to add to this, and I'm aware of the time, but I was particularly struck by Titaka's comment in the chat that there's a particular issue when Gen AI uses Te Reo Māori. The responses look really good, but they're sanitized, colonized. They lack nuance and authority, and that's the antithesis of Māori data sovereignty. And I think that's a really, really important point, because it speaks to, you know, the general veneer that you sometimes get with generative AI responses with tools like this. They lack that nuance, and they lack the deeper framework to even develop that. And I think it comes back to education and partnership, and that can happen within the university. That can happen within so not just having the data science program in isolation, focusing only on the technical aspects of AI research, but integrating them with Māori experts within the university, integrating them with research organizations like Te Puna Hamatatini, and building on that framework, looking at small wins, looking at specific models that actually give opportunity to explore that within the framework of data sovereignty, within an application where there's opportunity for direct benefit. Something like developing I don't like use the word chatbot too much, but developing a chatbot where youth in Māori youth in at-risk environments can chat with someone if they wouldn't otherwise feel uncomfortable chatting with anyone else. They can chat to a model effectively and have real prompts that they can relate to. So not too much to add, but I think that I'm not in a place of authority or education to do that myself. Absolutely. And so the only way we'll enable that is through partnership.
Thank you very much, James. So now I'm going to ask you if you can discuss things maybe in 30 seconds, last bit of words around this concept of democratizing AI innovation. So fundamental AI research in New Zealand is normally made open source and promoted as such, right, to contribute to the democratization of algorithms and technology. So how can researchers leverage open source approaches and New Zealand's domestic infrastructure to create alternative pathways for AI innovation that aren't solely dependent on commercial platforms? And I'm going to ask Gill to go first.
As Mong said earlier, we're a small country and we need to work together if we're going to be competitive in the world. So open source is really, really important for that. We need to be able to share our findings and build on each other's research. So I think it is the only way forward to democratize innovation.
Thanks, Gill. Markus.
I'll pick up our Prime Minister and the current government asking for a test bed NZ, but test bed for good. I think New Zealand has an opportunity for taking a very collaborative and collective approach towards sovereign AI and data infrastructure, and model that, and the desire internationally to use technologies like that is going to be increasingly high. We already see that within the EU, but within a completely different fragmented environment, which actually great opportunities also for under the Horizon framework cross collaborations, where the structure and characteristics of New Zealand are really, really interesting. And I think that's where we can lead.
Thank you, Markus. Mong.
Yeah, thank you. And Gill mentioned collaboration, Markus mentioned collective. Add another word, actually, sharing. And New Zealand is small and people need to share the resources. I think, in the previous ARA and association conference in Auckland, in my memory, so Bing or someone raised that, can build some repository. But this is easy to say, but that's very difficult, but we need to work together toward that direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Mong. And James.
I'd like to reference some of the successes that I've seen in industry in the machine learning space and the data science space, because I think we're seeing, what's new now in the AI space, and it's kind of the same industries, companies are going through the same kind of process here. And there is big successes when there is a clear intersection between domain knowledge and technical approaches in research. So using open source approaches is half of that equation. Being able to combine that with very deep domain knowledge, a problem that needs to be solved, and an awareness of how to take that open source approach and apply it within that domain, that's, I think, where New Zealand is often punching way above their weight on the world stage, because we have some industries where we have very deep knowledge, very advanced research on the global stage within those industries. And so if we have those open source approaches, if we deliberately combine them, and as academic institutions, if we're working with industry to help bridge that gap, if they've got the domain knowledge but aren't necessarily aware of some of those open source tools, there's real benefit for immediate innovation that bypasses, to some extent, the larger commercial platforms, because they either aren't solving that problem within that domain, or it's too specific for them because they're trying to solve the general problems across all domains, and they can't actually do that as efficiently as we can within our environment with that knowledge. So I think we really need to leverage the deep domain knowledge that we have in various industries in New Zealand, and then show the success of an open source approach within those.
Thank you very much, James. And I'm